Thanks, Jim, for having me here. And can everybody hear me clearly? Microphone's a little bit low. I don't really want to mess with it.
How's that? I'm just supposed to.
That's good. Thanks. The last one I touched, it fell apart fantastically. So I learned from those experiences. But just want to thank you again for having me here this evening. And as we usually do when we start off our meetings, I want to acknowledge the fact that we are on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit. I have a lot of thoughts of what I could say after seeing the video here this evening and hearing Waleed speak. As Waleed has alluded to, we've been doing some work together to try and bring better awareness of the issues facing First Nations in Canada to the Rotman School of Business. But I want to touch on a number of things here tonight that I believe are completely relevant to the video that we've just seen, what Waleed has said, and I will expand on them, particularly on ownership of assets or property that are crossing First Nations traditional territory, and how First Nations are taking steps themselves to build their business capacity and get into an ability to harness the wealth that is being generated off of their traditional territories, a wealth that since Confederation in this country they have been precluded from, for a variety of reasons, from taking part in. I do have a short video here that I'm actually going to elect to wait till the end of my remarks to play, because I think what it'll do is it'll give you good context to what I'm speaking about. So with that, I just want to describe briefly that within the Major Projects Coalition, the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, our governance structure is bottom up. We rely on the direction and advice of the communities involved, 50 now, I'm pleased to say, we hit 50 just today, in 5 provinces and 1 territory, who provide direction to our board of directors, who are appointed to those positions by our members. And the board of directors is entrusted to carry the vision of our members forward in terms of the business areas that we study. And myself as executive director, I'm in charge of making sure that our work plans and the work that our members expect us to do gets done, and that it gets reported back to them in the way that they expect to receive the information. So there is accountability on myself and others in the organization to get this work done, and I think it's important to emphasize that this exercise is not a whole bunch of consultants sitting in the back room dreaming up strategies as to where First Nations should go. This direction comes based on community level needs to meet gaps and challenges that communities face. First and foremost, in this discussion, if you're going to own something, you have to have the means to raise the capital to buy it. Things don't just come to you for free, as we all know, and this is a sticking point in this country in the ability of First Nations to address accessing capital to own major infrastructure on their lands and become owners of those assets for a variety of reasons. The biggest precluder to this success is the Indian Act itself. It was designed as a paternalistic piece of legislation way back when to essentially eradicate the Indian problem in this country. And I can't be much more blunt than that. It is a regressive piece of legislation that has kept a certain sector of our society from benefiting from the wealth that we all enjoy in this country. There have been advancements over the last 30, 35 years, incremental advancements to move away from some of that paternalism. I had the benefit of working for 5 years at the First Nations Financial Management Board, as Jim mentioned, with a gentleman by the name of Harold Cowell. Harold and others in this country championed a number of pieces of First Nations-led legislation. Most importantly and impactfully, the First Nations Fiscal Management Act. Waleed talks about the need to raise capital and secure bonds for financing. That's exactly what this piece of legislation is designed to do. It's not perfect, it's not fully evolved yet, but what it has enabled us to do is create entities such as the Major Projects Coalition that are dedicated to areas of public policy study and bringing about the necessary business capacity for First Nations to excel at their own business interests. Just a little bit of history on how that came to be. In 2014, a group of 16 First Nations in northern British Columbia successfully negotiated a 30% equity interest in the Pacific Trail's natural gas pipeline. This is a huge benchmark that had never been done before. They went to the commercial banks and said, can we get a loan to buy the equity we've negotiated? The bank said, we'll make the loan possible, but the interest on the loan will be equal to the rate of return on the pipeline. So, you know, it didn't make financial sense. They came to us and they said, how can we overcome these barriers? And so at that time, Harold asked some of us to go out and start analyzing the environment as to innovative solutions to project finance and access to capital. We started by looking at the value chain of major projects that were impacting the traditional territories of the First Nations that came to ask for the help. We started by doing an economic analysis of a hypothetical at the time LNG pipeline and liquefaction terminal at Kitimat, which we now know today as LNG Canada, is owned majority by Shell, and the pipeline is Coastal GasLink, the one that you're hearing all the news about in northern British Columbia. Our analysis determined that with government intervention backstopping the loan through a guarantee, after debt servicing, over 25 years of the project investing in the gas plant, the liquefaction terminal, and the pipeline at 30% equity, that investment would create a return after debt service of $5.5 billion. That's a hugely significant revenue stream that can be leveraged to create the necessities of the community. And what I mean by that is the infrastructure that Waleed talks about, the roads, the wastewater, housing, all things that we take for granted that are absent on reserve for the most part, or exist in very rudimentary ways. I don't know if you're aware, but the deficit in First Nations infrastructure nationally stands somewhere between $5 billion and $8 billion. That's what we're talking about when we hear the federal government saying they're making progress on wastewater treatment facilities and so on and so forth. Well, that's all very well and good, but to tackle a deficit of that large, you need to have a revenue stream, and that revenue stream can't be government source payments. It has to be empowerment through economic development under terms that the First Nations themselves are championing to create the kind of wealth that they need to see come to their communities to address their own infrastructure gaps. there is not one of our members out there that is waiting, hoping that Ottawa will have a change of heart and give them the money they need to address the shortcomings at home. That's why organizations like the First Nations Major Projects Coalition exist, because First Nations have realized it is time that they take these business matters into their own hands and start to develop the internal processes and capacity so they themselves can stand a fair chance at the business negotiation table with proponents and governments, so that they can start to own the assets that are crossing their traditional territories, and the empowerment of ownership and property rights. Not exactly the same kind of definition of property rights that you saw in the video, but if you own something, you have skin in the game, you're a part of the deal, you have a seat at the table, and you are directing what your future looks like in ways that you hadn't before. So I'm not going to drone on about this too much longer, but I want to leave you with a couple of examples of what we're working on today. Over the past 4 years, we have spent a lot of time and effort in creating sound business practices within the coalition that can support First Nations' drive to get into business. Those processes revolve around economic participation in the ownership side of things, but also the environmental stewardship aspect of major project development. Our communities have been clear that their environmental interests have to be satisfied as a gateway to negotiating a business deal. So we have come up with guidance documents that act as a baseline so that they can enter into commercial negotiations and produce an outcome, both from the environmental side and from the economic side. An example of that is the Kenny Dam hydroelectric facility, which is located about an hour west of Prince George in British Columbia. That came to us at the coalition at request of 4 communities impacted by this project opportunity who are acting as proponents of it. This is not industry coming to First Nations with a business idea. It's First Nations empowering themselves, saying, we have this opportunity within our territory and we want to make sure that it happens. So they came to us and asked us for capacity support. We put our models to work, and in a matter of 2 years we have brought the project, which had been on the books for some 30 years, I might add, as a concept. But for whatever reason, whether it was overlapping claims between First Nations or just internal politics, whatever the case may be, it could not get off the ground. We acted as an independent third party on behalf of First Nations to facilitate the kind of conversation that brings business partnerships together. We have enabled them to undertake the necessary feasibility studies and other requirements of business due diligence, and we were asked by the communities to go out and find a suitable private sector partner for them to partner with, and we've done that. I can't divulge all the details of that partnership, but I am pleased to say that the indicative terms proposal includes language that makes reference to the Truth and Reconciliation and Calls to Action, Article 92, as well as the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And that's written right into their commercial agreement they have with the private sector partners. So I'm trying to provide some context to you all that there is a new way of doing business with First Nations in Canada, and it's certainly happening at our level, and we're seeing it. The other aspect to this business partnership that we're quite proud of is that the private sector partner comes backed by Canadian institutional investment. So it's not foreign investment in Canada, it's our own money being spent on Indigenous business initiatives. So there is transformative change happening at our tables. The water release hydroelectric facility I just described is one of many projects that we're becoming involved in. We have to get to a point in this country where we are creating a new class of economic contributors in First Nations. This is something that they want. It is good for Canada. It will create other economies where they haven't been before, and build the social structures of our society that we all enjoy and bring those into the First Nations communities for the first time the way that they see fit, so they can take full control of their future destiny. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to ask if you could play the video, because the video really does do a better job of explaining this than I can. You're going to hear directly from our members and their message and what they see happening. So thank you.
Business success. There's this growing story of Indigenous business advantage, that working with Indigenous peoples is both good for the local, the regional, and the national economy, as well as the socioeconomic well-being of our First Nations communities.
First Nation Major Project Coalition, perhaps the most exciting thing happening in Canada right now in terms of Indigenous economic engagement. It is a mechanism and a tool for engagement, for wealth building, for prosperity building. It has enormous potential.
First Nation Major Projects Coalition is comprised of 49 First Nations from across Canada. It's been really great to share what we're doing with the other communities and to learn from them. We are building the foundation upon which our nations have started to work together to advance projects over shared and multiple territories.
mentality is Memorial is open for business. That's what we're here for.
Realizing how important it is to incorporate nations to be involved in their business projects, especially when they're happening on their own territories. We are the stewards of the land. We are the ones that have been living there for thousands of years. And I believe that through partnering with First Nations, you would have a long-term partner.
The coalition provides confidence to industry because we act as a professional clearinghouse of information and coordination so that there's one body for industry to be dealing with.
I think the timing of the First Nation Major Projects Coalition, it couldn't be better. Now is the time to start developing and start taking equity positions in improving our quality of life, and improving our income streams.
In our communities, there's a minimum of 85% of our people are on social assistance. Right. This gives us hope. We want to work in partnership so that it's a win-win.
There is a wealth in this country that we're going to be able to unlock through vehicles like the Major Projects Coalition that was only a dream even 5 years ago that is now becoming a reality.
The environment is changing, the way we think is changing, the way we do business is changing, and it's really bringing benefit to our nations.